video dealing with Johann Hari's reflections on our causes of our struggles with focusing. I'm a high school English teacher and a dad, and this matters to me personally, both in my family, in my own life, in my struggles focusing, and in the lives of my students. And we're going to have a video on the first three causes, of a video on causes 4 to 6 as well. So, cause number one that he reflects on, and I just want to say as a preface that if you're looking to be more efficient at work, or if you're one of my students or another student and you're looking to improve your performance, maybe finish your homework faster, maybe just be more efficient so you have time to do other things. Knowing the causes for why we struggle with something like attention can help us combat those struggles in a really efficient, effective way. So the first cause that Johann Hari suggests that we struggle with attention is that we've increased the frequency of our speed of how we get information, and then of how we switch from, the iPad to the television to the phone to homework, and then how we filter information. So he has this really interesting study that says if you take, people we imagine to be just really successful, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, a study was done that concluded that the average CEO of a Fortune 500 company gets just 28 uninterrupted minutes a day. So even among people who we would define as successful, people who we would imagine can control their own way of processing information, even those people struggle with attention. Also, a couple of pretty humbling statistics. The average American spends 3 hours and 15 minutes on their phone per day. The average American touches their phone 2,617 times per day. And what this means from my experience is that my students who used to finish their homework at 8 at night now finish it at 11 at night. I mean, those of us who could do a day of work in 6 or 8 hours might now take 12 hours. So why is it important to slow down? It seems countercultural. Everything in our culture wants to move faster. We want our phones to move faster. We want our food to cook faster. So the idea of slowing down seems like the opposite of what we should want. A researcher at the University of Winchester named Guy Claxton argues that we have to shrink the world in order to have it fit well in the way we think about the world. In other words, our minds need to shrink how we see the world. So he calls that cognitive bandwidth, basically our brain capacity. In his thesis, which is really important, and not many people live this way. I know I struggle with it. Slowness nurtures attention. Speed shatters it. I was cooking something I love to cook, and I was cooking something a few weeks ago, but I was, I think, listening to a podcast, and I might have been sending some texts here and there. And I forgot to put in an essential ingredient early on. It might have been like garlic or something that you couldn't really add later, And because of my compromised attention, that I was paying attention to lots of different things at once, I screwed up the main thing that I was doing. I think a lot of us have experiences like that. So the challenges of multitasking are as follows. And I know we, as a culture, pride ourselves on our ability to do more than one thing at once. We're cooking and listening to a podcast and sending texts. I'm doing math homework, but I'm also paying attention to a group text, and I also have a show that I like. I'm watching The Office, kind of, and that's over here. So here are the challenges of multitasking. And I'll be honest, these videos have quotes on them because I want you to see the actual text that Johann Hari wrote. Usually in PowerPoint slides, I don't allow my students to have this many words on a screen, but I want to give you some of the actual text rather than just me talking vaguely about it. So this first thing, really important, is the switch cost effect, which is to say, when we go from our homework to our phone to look at Snapchat back to our homework, there's a cost to that switch. It's called the switch cost effect. So if you're checking your text or snaps or Instagram while you're doing work, Hari says, you're not only losing the little bursts of time you spend looking at your text or snaps, but you're also losing the time it takes to refocus afterward, which can be a lot longer. So if your screen time at the end of the day shows that you're using your phone for 3 or 4 hours a day, you're actually losing a lot more than that in lost focus. As the previous video stated, studies have been done to indicate that when we switch where our attention goes, if we're reading and then we look at our phone and then we go back to reading, it takes 28 minutes to get to a deep place of focus again. So if we're just constantly sort of going back and forth, we're actually going to not be paying that close attention really ever. The second result of multitasking is called the screw up effect, which is what happened to me when I was cooking the other day. Switching tasks frequently causes mistakes, like forgetting garlic, because your brain is prone to making mistakes. And instead of spending critical time doing deep thinking, like I need to put onions and garlic to start this recipe, my thinking was more superficial because I was doing a lot of things at once. And then once I made mistakes, I had to try to figure out a way to correct the errors. And then I had to backtrack. So multitasking leads actually to more slow, inefficient work. The third effect of multitasking is called the creativity drain. This doesn't get discussed much in schools. Maybe that's because creativity doesn't get much discussed in schools because it isn't something that's measurable. But Hari quotes this MIT professor, Earl Miller, who discusses how frequently switching tasks gives your brain less of a chance to follow your associative links down to new places and have original and creative thoughts. And here's what I'll say about that. Like, even in a traditional writing assignment, like if I ask my students to give me their thoughts on the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet, one of the most iconic scenes in all of literature. If a kid turns off his notifications, puts his phone away, if he just has his book and his computer open, not looking at other social media sites, or he has, God forbid, a notebook, maybe he can start by looking at some quotes, and he could start realizing, like, man, a 13-year-old girl just met this guy at a party at her house, and he shows up unannounced in her backyard. I tell my students this is not a good dating strategy. And I think I could imagine one of my students then wondering, why does she propose to him? Man, like, my students have gone to dances and have met people and maybe asked them to dance. And, well, I don't know, that night they don't break into their yard and propose. Well, how does she do it, I wonder? You can imagine a kid ask that. Why does she tell Romeo that he's basically going to say whatever it takes to get her to like him? Why is that important? Why is it interesting that this girl who doesn't seem to even be allowed to leave her house by herself, why is it important or interesting that she seems to know so much? Why is it important or interesting that when they kiss earlier on, she says you kiss by the book? Anyway, what I'm demonstrating to you now is associative thinking. I latch onto something in a book and I wonder about it and I ask questions about it and I answer those questions, which maybe lead me to other questions. But what we notice in education now is that kids can basically, even good students, they can give me the plot summary of the balcony scene. But if you ask them to think about it or offer opinions about it or state what stands out or what's interesting about it, that requires a focused, deep thinking. That's really hard for students because it requires tunnel vision attention for a sustained amount of time. And the diminished memory effect has everything to do with being a top student. So according to a UCLA study, multitasking negatively affects memory. So how? So if I'm studying for a math test, but I'm also kind of on my phone and I kind of have, Game of Thrones on, what's going to happen is all those other things I'm kind of half paying attention to take up mental space and energy. And the thing I'm trying to focus on, math, I have limited mental space that I'm paying attention to it. So that experience of studying math, I can't really turn that experience into memories. And turning my experience of studying math into memories of math will determine my performance on the test the next day. So those of us who've ever kind of spent 3 or 4 hours studying something, but we kind of are paying attention to other things, and we show up the next day and get a 75, and we wonder, Why did I get a 75 on something? I studied for 4 hours. I didn't study for 4 hours. I was studying and doing other things, which meant I really wasn't studying. So the takeaway is, and we all know this, but it's hard to live this way in the 21st century. If we want to do something well, we need to focus on one thing at a time. So my suggestions are find things in your life that you just lose track of time doing, that you love, love, love. And it's not because it gets you something. It's just that you love it. It might be painting, drawing, an instrument, music, a sport or physical activity, running, weightlifting, any hobbies whatsoever. But just something that you do and you kind of lose track of time doing. If you want to watch a football game or a movie or a show, do it. Put everything else away though. Don't have your phone and be looking at your phone and watching and looking at your phone and watching. Just watch it. For a long time, I would like have the football game on Sunday and I kind of have schoolwork out. And I would kind of be doing schoolwork and kind of watching the football game, but I would be doing neither of them well. And when I make good choices, what I do is I do schoolwork for a while on a Sunday, and then I might watch the second half of the football game. But the schoolwork's done really well and efficiently because I'm doing one thing. And then football, I can just relax and watch it and not worry about half paying attention to something else. A big thing is that we're going to fail. It's like a diet. You know, when you change something significantly in your life, it's not going to catch right away. So if you're not used to sustained attention just on one thing, if you're not used to having your phone out while you do things, well, you're going to screw up, right? We're going to make mistakes. Forgive yourself. And if you say to yourself, geez, I tried to read for an hour and it only lasted 25 minutes, that's okay. Now you know you can do it for 25 minutes. Try to push yourself to 30, make little tweaks. So the second cause with our struggles with focusing is what Hari calls the crippling of our flow states. Flow states is that state where you lose track of time and you're just totally in the zone. He goes away. Hari tells this really interesting story. He's a journalist, so he's on his phone a lot and he writes a lot and he reads a lot, but he was noticing that he was having a hard time reading books. He was spending all of his days on Twitter and social media. And he took with him, among other things, he went to Cape Cod and he took with him Charles Dickens's favorite novel that he ever wrote, David Copperfield, his most autobiographical novel. And it's 800 pages. I mean, it's a lot. And this guy who's a reader and a writer for a living writes, I was scanning Charles Dickens the way you might scan a blog for vital information. He really wasn't reading it. He was skimming it. My reading was manic and extractive. He was just trying to pick little moments. And David Copperfield, the character, is an orphan, and you get a lot of information about that. Okay, I got it. He's an orphan. What's your point? I could see this was foolish, but I couldn't stop, Hari writes. I couldn't slow my mind in the way that yoga slowed my body. So how do our flow states, our ability to pay sustained attention, how are they crippled? So some of this has to do with B.F. Skinner, who's a really important important kind of founder of behavioral psychology. And his thesis is that people do things to gain rewards and to avoid punishment. So I can imagine a young student wanting to get on the honor roll because his parents have promised him a new video game console or a new guitar or something. So I do this and I get this. Conversely, students often try hard in school because they don't want to get in trouble with their parents. I think my son did really well in school in the fields that he loved. And, things like math and science, he did well enough to not get into trouble at home. So he was thinking of getting rewarded on the one hand and then like avoiding punishment in the other. And we know this because, it's a pretty common human dynamic. So the idea of flow is sort of an exception to Skinner. Skinner says we do things to get rewards or avoid punishment, but being in a flow state suggests that we do things sometimes just to do things. That the quote from Hari is that sometimes an activity is its own reward. This could for us be climbing a mountain or jogging or writing or painting or anything that has value all by itself. We can do certain things in a deep, focused way because we value them. Doing this is called the flow state, and it helps us perform better and more deeply. So one of the common application college essay prompts this year is discuss an activity that you do where when you do it, you lose all track of time. Well, that's just right about when you experience the flow state. And I teach, 40, 45 seniors a year. Hardly anyone writes about that. And I think it's because most people never achieve the flow state anymore. They bounce from thing to thing. How do you bring about the flow state? Like if you're interested in this, if you never experienced this, Hari says that there's a few things. First, choose a goal and really focus on it, but make sure the goal is clearly defined. So I want to practice free throws on the basketball court is good, but maybe the defined goal is I want to consistently hit 7 out of 10 free throws. Maybe it's I want to be able to read better, but define your goal. I want to be able to read uninterrupted in a focused way for 30 minutes, you know? So that's A. B, pick something that matters to you, that you want to really do, that means something to you. It might be reading, it might be basketball, it might be music, it might be I want to be able to run through a 5K, whatever it is. And next, do something that's the edge of your abilities, but not beyond them. When you do a set of like weightlifting, you don't want it all like 10 reps to be easy, right? You know it's probably the right weight when the last couple are really difficult. Um, if you can only read for like 5 minutes before you're getting distracted, you don't want to say, today I'm gonna try to read for 90 minutes. You want to do 10 or 15. If you've never run ever, you're not going to say I'm going to run a marathon today, right? And the third cause for our struggle focusing is this is just so obvious if you're just like walking around in the world, you see this, the rise of physical and mental exhaustion. So there's been a lot of studies about why a lack of sleep damages our ability to focus. And this is really, really important if you're a parent, if you're a kid, if you're a student, if you're a teacher. This is really, really important. And this is a long quote, but this is mega important, I think. Hari says one of the things that happens that during sleep, your brain cleans itself of waste that has accumulated during the day. And he quotes this Minnesota sleep psychologist, Roxanne Pritchard. She says during slow wave sleep, your brain spinal fluid channels open up more and remove metabolic waste from your brain. Every night when you go to sleep, your brain's rinsed with a watery fluid. Like, stop. Like, I didn't know this, right? I didn't study psychology or neuroscience or whatever. This cerebrospinal fluid washes through your brain, flushing out toxic proteins, carrying them down to your liver to get rid of them. And then she goes on. When I'm talking to college students, I call this brain cell poop. If you can't focus well, it might be that you have too much brain cell poop circulating. And that can explain why when you're tired, you get like a hungover kind of feeling. You're groggy and you're clogged up with toxins. So some sleep deprivation systems, signs you're not getting enough sleep, being tired, being moody, difficulty concentrating, difficulty remembering, and then like paranoia and hallucinations. But if you think of, geez, why am I not doing as well in school as I think? Well, if you take your phone with you to bed and you're on it till 2 or 3 in the morning, it isn't weird that you're tired and you struggle concentrating and you struggle remembering things. And guess who struggles in school among other people? People that struggle remembering things and people that struggle concentrating and people that are tired, right? In terms of causes of sleeplessness, there's a Harvard scientist who says every time we turn on a light, we're inadvertently taking a drug that affects how we'll sleep, right? Until relatively recently, there was no, other than candlelight, when the sun went down, it was dark and that was it. And our bodies, acclimatized to just natural light and natural darkness. But now we can be living in a world of light 24 hours a day. So the first cause of sleeplessness is our relationship with physical light. And there's some solutions, there's some workarounds. And the first one is hardly anybody does this. Hardly anybody. I use my phone as my alarm, so I'll admit that my phone's in my room next to my bed when I sleep. No source of artificial light where you sleep. Maybe a couple of lamps, some books to read, but you want to help yourself sleep, remove the technology from your room. If you want to help your kids sleep, you're going to have to fight a little bit. You're going to have to deal with angry kids. take away the devices, put them in your room or put them somewhere else. Or just disarm the internet at night, which you can do, right? No source of artificial light where you sleep. Secondly, again, really hard to do, particularly if your work is on your computer. Avoid the blue light of screens for at least 2 hours before you go to bed. If you go to bed at 11, that means starting at 9, read a book, listen to some music, you know, talk to somebody, but that just means no devices. Third, make sure your room is dark and cool, and that's it. So those are the first 3 causes of our struggles with attention. I hope this video taught you some things, and I hope it's helpful.